Welcome, welcome everybody. Rabéa Ballin and myself, and I just introduced her. So we have been technically challenged. So bloopers and all, we are going to give you an artist activism presentation today.
We're doing it now. We are in the middle of a snowstorm. No, I'll say winter storm. We are both blessed. We have electricity. We've got the heat on. We're doing
water.
Yeah, we're working for you.
Everything is cool except this presentation. We're having technology issues, but Lord knows it could be worse. So
yeah, this is the new normal, they say. So.
Right. This is 2021. It's supposed to start off differently, but we're gonna make it. We're gonna fight through this. Yes. So let's get into this presentation. And screen.
You know, I had the privilege of visiting a PV campus in person to do this lecture the first time. So I'm really, really happy to be here as well. I want to say hello from my campus, Lone Star College North Harris. And hopefully we, spark your interest in a subject that is on everybody's mind right now.
Right. So shout out to PrintAustin and Prairie View. Rabéa and I have been doing this lecture. See our cute picture that was taken in Austin. I did a talk for women in their work. Is that 2016, I think?
Yeah.
I think it was 2015, 2016. And I think it was 2015. I think that was before my show there. So we have been doing this presentation for several years. We both enjoy doing it. And part of this, our focus is to show that art activism is more than a mural. It can be extremely conceptual. She and I are in an artist collective called Root. That's us cutting up as usual with Lovey Olivia and Delita Martin. And we'll do a presentation on Root one day.
Yeah.
But that's where our connection and our sisterhood comes from.
Absolutely. And, over the years, we've connected on other things as well, and subject matter being one of them, partly because you're an amazing curator and you like to talk about things, you're not retired. You like to talk about things that are important to, both of us talk about personal things, but now we've branched out to addressing issues, as they're women centric, if you will, that are important and issues that keep coming up and haven't gone away. So your candle here speaks to that.
Right. So this summer, when we had our fiery summer, Delita and I speak just about every day. And through the night, we would just wake up in the middle of the night working. And I had done these series of candles actually for PrintAustin 2018, which is our last Root exhibition at Pfizer Letters Gallery. I can never get it correct.
Pfizer Arts and Letters Gallery.
Pfizer Arts and Letters. They were so sweet. And so the true title of this lecture today, because we always change the aim for this artist activism series, is Remixed and Reloaded, which is a shout out also to a beautiful CAM exhibition. So I couldn't think of it.
Also a shout out to our love of hip hop.
Yes.
Because we love a good remix, and we're here for that too. So
Cinderella one time. But I thought Inner City Blues by Marvin Gaye, I would do these candles and I would shoot these videos and I post them on Instagram, but it's how people were feeling. And I will address these candles more as we move along. Full transparency as well. You will see a lot of our works in this presentation today, as our works really relate to different levels or interests of activism. And we'll talk about shifts in our works, as well as we really want to try to show you conceptual pieces.
I just wanted to add that is so true. And, right now, when we hear the word activism, the way that it reaches us now, there's a lot of negativity around what that looks like. We tend to see protests that have turned violent, or perhaps are only reporting those aspects of the protests that we don't see really, when in fact many of them are peaceful, but they're brought to us through a different lens. So artists take on the responsibility for doing activism in ways that are, genuine to them. And so
Right.
this is something that has been going on for decades, which is a great thing that we like to share with our students, that, hey, activism is not something that just happened,
Right.
last year, or in, just like you say, it's not just a mural.
Right.
There's so many different forms it can take, some very quiet and some very loud.
Right. I love that you use the word genuine, because too often, we saw too many George Floyd t-shirts, profiting off of the death of a cause and a cause. A genuine artist is a genuine artist, and they're doing it because their heart is telling them to do it. Marlon Hall, a good friend of ours, told me years ago, use your creativity as your activism. Everybody's not built for the streets. As bad as I wanted to be out there this summer, I wasn't trying to play with Miss Corona. Can't run like I used to, and so I had to come up with a different way to get my feelings out. So in 2016, Toni Morrison, after the election of 2016, a lot of people I know started getting these postcards and letters from Toni Morrison. I don't know Toni Morrison, but she had this very famous quote: "This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. This is how civilizations heal." And she said that in 1984, and that this is precisely the time when artists go to work is just it so applies to what's going on now. And the thing about this summer, it's not like this stuff hadn't been happening. Your nod to hip hop. NWA told you that when they said F the police. What was that, in 1984? Probably around that time. It's just that we're seeing it now. We know this has been going on because it's happened to us, but now the world is seeing it because of social media and technology.
That's right. And it seems like we're bombarded, or that things are getting worse. And progressively, I guess, in terms on a global scale, they are to a large degree, but the issues are the same.
Right.
And people are frustrated, and they lean to their politicians for answers, or they lean to their spirituality for answers or coping mechanisms. And artists, really an important job is for us to be documentarians,
Right.
and kind of fill those voids where the history books and the media perhaps aren't going to give you everything. And also, as we'll see by the end of this presentation today, artists also provide a sense of comfort and hope. Yes. In many ways.
Definitely. So January 5th was a tremendous day. And that was when Georgia officially turned blue. They elected 2 Democratic senators. They had won the state for the election by over 11,000 votes, which was a big deal. And a lot of that is attributed to Stacey Abrams. So I am an experimental printmaker. A large portion of this presentation will focus on printmaking, but not all of it. And I will print on just about anything except paper. And I started printing on raw cotton summer of 2019 actually. And I thought it would be, for me, it was powerful because of this particular image of her. But the fact that Stacey Abrams did what Toni Morrison said, she went to work. She was cheated out of the governorship of Georgia. So she didn't get mad, she didn't pout, she didn't cry, she organized. And she started fair fight, and she got the vote out, and she got people mobilized to vote. And those results showed in the 2020 election. She's talked about her ancestry, her grandmother's great-grandparents picking cotton. So to print her on cotton in blue is very intentional. With the red background, I never used colored backgrounds, but now this is red, white, and blue. This is the story of America, of an American. And the actual cotton bowls are actually cotton from a plantation. So it's called "The South Got Something to Say," which was a famous quote by Andre 3000 from the rap group Outkast when they won, I think it was Artist of the Year at the Source Awards. And he said, "The South got something to say."
Yeah, I love how this feels like an artifact, like you really took a moment in time and encased it and preserved it in a beautiful way. One of the things that I like about your work is your experimentation and using different materials. Who would have thought that a photograph could print on cotton so clearly and so beautifully?
Yeah, this was nothing but the Lord. I'm gonna tell you, because technology issues, printmakers understand when you're working with photopolymer plates, you have to get the correct exposure time, and the plates that I've used, that I've cut my teeth with, no longer exist. So I had to use a different plate from a different company, and I couldn't get that plate right to save my life. I called the leader and I told her my printmaking life is over. I'm done. I can't do it. She said, try it one more time. And I was able to get this to print, and it just printed beautifully. I got a couple of leaves and then this one print on cotton. Glenn Lagann in 2012, he's known as an artist that works with text. And this is such an interesting piece, particularly as it relates to this lecture, but as it relates to the state that we're in. We're clearly a divided country. And he presents it in lights. And America is going, it's backwards, right? And the top is white and the bottom is black. There's a dividing line. And it just says so much about where we are as a country and our divisions.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It speaks to that double consciousness that we're familiar with. A great example of a conceptual piece. You know, different people are
Yes.
going to take different things from a piece like this. And it also speaks to like using materials that are, you know, typically not used to make art. And then making something like this to shed light on, you know, I love a neon sign.
Yes.
So,
And you know, what's interesting is that he left the chords because it shows the chaos.
you're right, right.
And
Nothing is hidden here.
Disconnect. Yes, yes. So when President Kennedy was assassinated, young Cassius Clay and Malcolm X were approached by a reporter, and they asked Malcolm about the situation, and Malcolm said, well, this is a case of the chickens coming home to roost, as it related to the death of President Kennedy. After he made that statement, he was pretty much ousted from the Nation of Islam, went on to start his own organization, and was soon after assassinated. But what Willie Cole presented, and this is one of my favorite sculptures of all time, is a rooster, a hen, a chicken, and it's covered in matches. And if you would drop a match on this sculpture, boom, 2020 in America. That's what happened this summer. And I just think it's such a powerful, you know, I always tell my students, don't look at the work, look into it. If you're looking at it from a distance, you see a hen, but when you look into it, you see the matches, and then you start to relate to the message. Also this summer, the New York Times put out a list of the 25 most influential works of American protest art since World War II. And there has been a movement for years to get rid of these Confederate monuments. They're exciting to some people, but when you think of the root of the Confederate army and what they were fighting for, you know, we're not all loving these. And so this is the Robert E. Lee Monument in Richmond, Virginia. And what they did was they created these projections. You can see George Floyd, Harriet Tubman, John Lewis, LBGTQ rights, the rainbow on the left side. And it was very, very powerful to reclaim the power from Robert E. Lee.
Yeah, and the way that you see the graffiti on the sculpture, you know, that's not artists making something pretty. That speaks to the origins of graffiti too, which was the voice of the people, voice of the streets, and putting their frustrations out there very publicly. And so it's, you know, very pertinent to what's going on now, that, you know, people are frustrated.
Right.
And they're going to express that in so many different ways.
And what was, you know, beautiful to see this summer was the multiculturalism within the streets. You know, who was out there protesting. One of the slogans this summer was, and I will fully admit to cracking up the first time I saw this, we are not our ancestors, we will F you up. But if she was a student in my class, I would say, yeah, hey sis, yes, you are your ancestors. because the fight and the lives that were taken to give you the right to protest makes you, yes, ma'am, you are your ancestors. So I did this piece in 2019. I printed on sweet potato paper, which is a crop that comes from Africa. The yam, the sweet potato, is an original crop of Africa. And it has layers of ancestry, starting with the cotton. The gold can also represent the golden areas of Northern Africa, Nubia. The center figure is a young slave girl, and the image on the top, the great autumn night, represents the current. So it does represent layers of ancestry, and it's called The Harvesters.
Yeah, something I want to share with your students, and something that I share with mine, is I always encourage them to make something to prove that you were alive this day. And when I look at like you making these pieces and they're so beautifully crafted, that's like therapy for us. It's like our, you know, we can't do anything on a major scale to prevent the things that are going on, but you know, our therapy is just going to make and have some like portals to these conversations, and keep them. So in years forward, looking back, what are, when archaeologists dig and look at artifacts, you know, what was on the minds of artists during this time? So your work is important for that reason.
Thank you. So these two pieces represent America's greatest sin is slavery. And these are two narratives. On the left side, Plantation Lullaby. So this piece, it's encased in a trumpet. It's a poet, his name is Nine. I don't even know his real name, but he modeled for me. But being printed on cotton and placed inside of an object that represents music is called Plantation Lullaby. Even though this is a current image of someone I know, it's the same old song over and over. Someone will say something racist, oh, I didn't mean to offend. Someone will shoot somebody unarmed and there's no accountability. It's the same old song over and over. Then on the right side, and Rabéa talked about double consciousness. As people of color, we have to see ourselves through the eyes of others for our own protection, literally for our own protection. But this piece called You Can't See How You See Me, printed on feather, encased in a glass box littered with pennies and cowrie shells. And I was inspired to do this in 2016, 2017, when Sean Spicer did one of his first press conferences before he was hiding in the bushes. And April Ryan, White House reporter for the Urban Radio Network, asked him a question and she went like this. I've probably done that 4 or 5 times already. You kind of shake your head because you forget what you were going to say. And he looked at her and said, don't you shake your head at me. And I know every Black woman in America was like, you ain't my daddy. You know, who are you to talk to somebody like that? But it's because in the eyes of certain people, they will never see people of color, and particularly Black folks, more than that original sin as a descendant of slaves, not being smart, not being equal. And so this piece, which says, you can't see how you see me, has the image of a young slave girl. I believe her name is Louisa. Some books say Clara, but the caption says, Louisa holding her owner, right? So take that in, that baby owns her. And when I look at her, and I use her image quite a bit, that look that she is giving me is saying, you know, look what I went through. Are we still doing this? People just don't want to admit to having racist tendencies. So that's that piece.
Well, racist tendencies is a great segue, and this is a piece that I really, really enjoyed making, and this is from our second iteration of our Rue exhibitions called Stir. It was your favorite.
Mm-hmm.
This is my little area, and what you see in the foreground are pillows. They were handmade by my mom, and they're silk screen, these shortened versions of a larger story that centers around the history of plissage. Because of time, I won't go into it, But having been raised primarily in Louisiana, I'm an Army brat, so we moved around a lot. My dad got out of the military and was raised near Lake Charles, Louisiana, which is not that far from us. And I was completely shocked and disappointed in my own education because I didn't discover the history of these plissage balls, which plissage means to place, and it all centers around the idea of grooming the children of mulatto women. There were very strict stipulations to then be groomed to be placed, which plissage is a French word for to place, with these European men in these arranged marriages, which were technically illegal. So just the idea of not legalizing or outlawing misogyny, which is what mixed marriages is, was disturbing. And not hearing about it in the same state that you were raised in, where this whole the birthplace of the French Quarter all centers around this story. So I wanted to bring some attention to that. So one of the things that I like to do in my work is to tell slept on histories. And that's why you see the pillows. History is slept on. You'll read terminology in Creole. Quadroon, octoroon, griff is a product of Native American and Black, Blanc, white, you know, and just having to have these certain degrees of whiteness in the blood to be considered good enough to be placed in these marriages. It's all very odd and weird, but also makes up the fabric of American history that often gets very overlooked. On the next slide, you'll see a closer view of the matriarch of the family, and I speak to just colorism and the different shades of going from Black to white with printmaking.
Okay, I'm going to switch to the next, but I just wanted to say what is fascinating, and I love this, probably one of my favorite works that you've done, is because you're so known for drawing, right? And drawing hair, and now such an underrated photographer. But this is just words, and it's so powerful. It's literal, the literal pillows. So when you say history slept on, you automatically make a connection in words. We may not understand everything, but we understand code, noir, and quadroon and octoroon. We know about that one drop. So it's a perfect example of looking into a work. So simple, so conceptual, but so strong.
Thank you for saying that. Part of the reason why I did rely so heavily on being conceptual is because we have no images.
Right.
You know, even after photography was invented in the mid 1800s or so, you were privileged to have a photograph taken of you, and if you were part of just an unrecognized lineage, you weren't good enough to be written about, photographed, painted, so this image to me was very powerful. And I wanted to show all the degrees using ink, because it's a printmaking project, so you see the hexadecimal codes for colors going from Black all the way to white in 6 degrees. 6 was an important number in this series, and these are 3 of those. And I love the white on white ink too. Yes, this is just a mid-range gray, and it still gets lighter from there. It was really fun to print white on white. And
it addresses colorism within colored communities.
Absolutely.
Me
being Hispanic, right, is prevalent in my community.
Right.
In all cultures, there's elements of colorism.
Right. And the root of colorism in America was so intentional. You had the darker slaves in the field, the lighter slaves in the house. You knew that those were master's children. So now you had animosity between those women and the mistress. So it's so rooted.
Yeah, and everything was labeled, Yes. The history of passing is something that I'm researching right now for a project coming up, and that aligns very closely to.
Yeah. So in 2016, I was very fortunate to show at Women in Their Work in Austin. Shout out again to Austin. And it's actually a series that I had started the year before on a much smaller scale. And at the time, President Obama was president, and people were just saying so many nasty things. Now it's a whole different level. You got people bombarding the Capitol. But then most of it was online. And so I came up with this concept of, you know what, I'm gonna have these trees and 2 chairs and have people sit down and have a face-to-face conversation. If you can say it on a keyboard, say it to somebody's face, right? And there were trigger words on the branches like vote, breathe, police, Trump, because I was ahead of my time, SCOTUS, Supreme Court, Obama, Tamir, North Carolina, all of these things. Every word you see there, I could have applied yesterday. And you would have thought that I did this in 2020, but this was 2016. And then I have images printed on leaves, because printing on sycamore leaves are like printing on fabric or velvet. And the idea with that is that the people that you talk about, maybe in the dark or kitchen table talk, are now appearing on your conversation. So this is kind of a wider shot at the top. I had sporadic trees with chairs, even children's chairs. And so if you were at this exhibition, particularly if you were with someone else or a stranger, you had to sit down and talk about it. So at the bottom, it's my mother and my auntie, but people would actually come during their lunch break and sit down under the trees and have a conversation. And then on the end, one of our great documentarians of African-American art is Dr. Wardlaw. So I have been able to travel this exhibit. Started actually at HCC, Southwest Houston Community College. Then we took it to Texas Southern University Museum. Then it went to Women and Their Work, and it's gone on to Syracuse, San Antonio, and Brenham, Texas.
Which speaks to the need of sitting down face to face and conversing.
Right, right. It was actually going to be converse real talk, because conversate ain't a word, because my sister can't stand that word conversate, but I shortened it up. And these are some of the detailed images, and I still have most of these leaves. And I'm a big fan of shadow. So it was lit beautifully. They did such a fantastic job at Women in Their Work. And these are all people I know, people that we know that are in the art community, church community in Houston.
Yeah, the same exhibition that we did for Stir, these were Delita's prints. I almost call them posters, because they look like,
Well, they were designed to be like posters.
Yeah, exactly. And it also speaks to language and graphic design and all of that. And I think with that exhibition, we were pretty much each blown away, but by what each person brought to that exhibit, because we don't talk to one another about and come up with a common theme. We think of a title, a working title, and then we go and do our thing. And just I love the fact that she's working with hair, because that's something that I work with so much. The revolution will not be texturized. I mean, this was the first time where I was like, Delita's a force to be reckoned with. And it just completely blossomed from there.
Watch her growth has been, I can monitor Delita's growth from our first Rue show to the last one. And you could just see the progression, the size, the scale, the medium. Well, I've always loved this series. My actual favorite one was The Bigger the Afro, the Closer to God. But I thought these particular 3, I think there was 30 posters in that series. And these are letterpress and relief print. Is that these really talk about hair politics, which is even in the military, you had to have rules adjusted because they weren't allowing women to wear their natural locks, trying to dictate how their hair should look. I'm not a natural hair Nazi. Some people are. Shout out to the Gorilla Girl. Gorilla Glue Girl, that's a whole nother class and presentation. But I love how, the hot comb is red, because if you were a little Black girl, you sat in that kitchen on Saturday and you got your hair pressed. You had to hold your ear down. You could hear your hair sizzle. And that's all in the politics of having the quote unquote good hair or the straight hair. So there's we had to revisit this for Women's History Month. There's a whole conversation to be said around Black hair.
There really is. Hair is such a sensitive subject, especially where I come from, being in Louisiana. But
Yeah.
I can attest to many burn marks on the back of necks for the sake of, you know, beautification processes. And I'm extremely, you know, interested in the fact that there are laws that prohibit how you decide you want to wear your hair. That blows my mind, you know.
And it's even in Native American culture too, you know, they try to put hair lengths on little boys. So there is a lot there. One of my favorite photographs you have ever, my all time.
You do like this one. I think it's because I named it Unapologetic.
Well, you know, there's a little story behind that exhibition. We unapologetically had one. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, you know, the reason why I'm so into hair is because, you know, my mom owned a beauty salon. Mm-hmm. And it was called Hair International. And we, you know, she very much wanted it to be a place where a Black stylist was there. She was a barber. We lived near the Army base. So, you know, doing barber cuts is very different. She had a white stylist, and it was, you know, it wanted to bring all people together, but, you know, we have different ways of treating different hair, and that's important. And so from a young age, I was around like watching all these various beautification processes. And, you know, I lived in the Bible Belt. So you had Pentecostal women that wanted their hair teased and made really large, like almost clouds and these sculptures, you know. But this photograph, I did a project for Project Row Houses in 2015, 2016, as the date says here, that addressed just these ideals of beauty and access to beauty products. We'll kind of just leave it there. Gorilla Glue Lady is a perfect example of someone who didn't have or maybe was misled to use a product that was not meant, because we do that, right? We try all sorts of things on ourselves. Mm-hmm. But sometimes we, because of our religion, cover it up. So it's kind of an ominous image here, because you might look at it and think, oh, is this a terrorist? Is this, you know, somebody who's covering up their face and they're about to be executed? You know, Islamophobia was something that is a wide issue here in the States, you know. And this is my friend who's Muslim, and this is the back of her head with a beautiful purple scarf. And because I normally photograph and capture the back of women's hair, men too, but mostly women, I thought this was a nice tribute to her choice, which often incites fear. Or in the workplace, you have rules and regulations, or you may be ostracized because that's how you decide to.
Yeah, it's such a powerful piece. And initially, I thought it was the back of a head because you draw the back of heads, and knowing, you know, that it's just so powerful. It's a beautiful piece, and it's printed on aluminum. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's on metal.
Yeah. This is from our 4th exhibition, Sugar, for Print Houston.
Yeah, I think, you know, I was really struggling with what to make work about for this series.
Me too. I had such a mental block for that show.
I think we all did, and that was one of the things we had in common. The other thing we had in common was using circles, and that it was such a coincidence, because we did not talk about that. But something that just was going on at the time, it was when the extremist group in Nigeria, Boko Haram, had kidnapped over 200 young girls. The initial number that was released was 234, which coincidentally is Nigeria's country code. Mm-hmm. So I was like, wow, again, this thing with numbers, you know. And not all of the young girls who were kidnapped at the time were known by name. So you see from, you know, towards the end, there's just unknown. Mm-hmm. And when I was a kid, I had to walk to school by myself, literally by myself. We lived on the Army base. This is in Germany. I went to German school, which started a couple of hours later. So after all the military kids, all the American kids got on the bus to go to school, here I was leaving the Army base, walking by myself, and I was completely terrified of getting kidnapped. Nothing happened to me. But when I read this story, it just brought back these flashbacks of, you know, you're supposed to be able to go to school and get educated and that be one of the safest places.
Right.
Sometimes the only meal you have is the meal you have at school.
Right.
So this kind of trumped every other thing, and I didn't think it was getting the visibility that it deserved. It's still ongoing. You can still hear updates about some of the girls, maybe 100 or so, being placed back with their families, other girls being forced to stay
with babies.
Yeah, and so each of these circles and numbers represents one of those girls. But again, a number is not personal, as you'll see. We get placed in systems as numbers, and it's really not personal.
It was really a powerful installation because it was on the floor, so you had to interact with it. And then to me, it reminded me of landmines. You had to carefully walk around the issue. It was very, very powerful. So Levy Olivia, our other Ruth sister, Levy and I are probably the most rebellious printmakers because we just will not print on paper. But Levy always comes up with something just genius. That's the only word I could say, brilliant and genius. And so when we had our 5th exhibition, which was called Coal, right over my shoulder is the poster. Again, any hip hop reference comes from Rabéa and I. And it's such a large space. We were at the University Museum at Texas Southern where Delita graduated. And the great thing about the Artist Collective RU is that we don't trip on who's getting more shine. You know, we don't trip on that. And we felt that that was Delita's homecoming. She was Gladys and we were the Pips and we were cool with that.
That's right.
So here comes Levy with this, laying this stuff out. Like, what are you doing? You know, what's this stuff? And you cannot see the texture, but these are actually Black monoprints. And when you look at it, it says matter. And the only way you could read it was when you photographed it. When you were there looking at the piece, you couldn't read the words. But the fact that she minimized the struggle to just matter. It's not Black Lives Matter, matter. And you start to think of the scientific matter. It's just fascinating. And so this is a side view of it, because it's stacked pieces of plaster. Plaster is her preferred medium, but it stacks, but you can only read it when you photograph it. Just genius. This exhibition, she showed it for the 2nd time at the Station Museum, which is one of the best museums in Houston that most people don't know about. And she did this piece called Beautiful Gentrification. And anybody who lives in a major city understands what gentrification is and what it does to people who live in inner city communities. They're being displaced. And so this beautiful gentrification, I don't have the slide on here, but she peels, one of the things that Levy does is she peels back the layers of walls. She's peeling back history. And as she peeled back and reveals how many different colors that this wall has been painted, she wrote out almost in the same manner, beautiful gentrification, but then it says beautification. And it's just such a powerful installation. Powerful.
Yeah, and so we couldn't leave this out because this is one of her most recent works. This is a billboard that she did, or mural, outdoor mural that she did right outside of the station just last year. Bloom for real. I mean, she's speaking to positive body imagery on top of all of the protesting and the madness that was going on, you know, behind her. You know, she was about this concept of, you know, blooming and becoming, and she's throwing, you know, she's throwing flowers.
Yeah.
She's masked up, so you can tell this was fairly recently. It's like she's throwing seeds.
Right.
Yeah, we like to mention the backdrop. This is right in the heart of Third Ward. You know, here we have these clusters of townhomes, you know, and it's just affecting the entire fiber of the neighborhood. You know, the gentrification is a real thing in Third Ward, but also creating, you know, she's throwing seeds. You see the word seed across her chest there, and she's actually going to be planting seeds. You can speak a little bit more on that.
Well, she is also addressing food deserts and environmental racism. So again, activism isn't always just about art of race relations.
Right.
In this particular, I was just reading, which you would love, Stella McCartney's new line for Adidas is all environmentally friendly. And so her throwing the seeds, and they're literally planting seeds, because this area where this mural is located, and the only mural in this presentation, it's a block and a half away from a large homeless population. So creating a little garden in that space, she's able to feed the people at no charge, And that's something that is so needed in the city, is healthy eating. You can find the chicken wing, you can find the fried catfish, but how often do you find fresh fruit and vegetables for free?
You know, I'm one of the things you just mentioned was that activism isn't always about like political issues. And that's really important to me personally, because you know, I don't focus on that per se. I like to just talk about overlooked histories, you know, and I love Lovey's approach here to, you know, her form of activism is just to provide food. And the fact that we are where we are in 2021 and people aren't eating well.
And the children are not eating at all because of school.
Right.
It's just horrifying. I Am a Man, this is a famous protest in 1968 in Memphis, which is why Martin Luther King went to Memphis, because of the sanitation workers strike. The segregation laws were so strict in Memphis that these sanitation workers, if it was raining, they couldn't, you know, get shelter in the closest building. They couldn't use the facilities. And during a storm, 2 of the sanitation workers actually fell inside of one of the dump trucks and were crushed to death. And so we see this I Am a Man all the time, but a lot of people don't really know the story or the nature of it. And from the research I could find, is Emerson Graphics was the company who printed the signs. But it's so significant because if you were a Black man, particularly in the South at that time, you felt less than a man. My father tells me stories of being called preacher. He's not a preacher. Or deacon, he's not a deacon. Or boy, and he's a grown man. So that hurt went a long way. So just to stand up and say, I am a man, is powerful, and it's dangerous, is very dangerous. So the performance artist, Dred Scott, he actually recreated several civil rights era photographs, even when people were being chased by dogs and sprayed with water hoses. But this one was interesting. It says, I am not a man. So it's the antithesis of what the sanitation workers were showing, but he's just expressing how they felt. And I believe he was in New York City. I believe he was in Harlem, just creating his own performance protest. So performance art and happenings are certainly another means of activism.
Yeah, we were in response to a call from the African American Library at the Gregory School, the curator Danielle Burns, in conjunction with what the Menil was showing at the time. I think their focus was on Gandhi and nonviolent protesting. She you know, curated a group of artists, myself included, that's myself there in the middle, and just to address, you know, the idea of protesting. Mine was centered around what are people interested in protesting, and the sit-ins are were they effective? Are the same issues still occurring? What is the final answer? And so I set up a wheat paste. It was actual size. At the 4 men that are alongside of me are all my studio mates at different times. We have, you know, Houston artists Robert Hodge, Philip Pyle, Anthony Suber, and Brian Ellison, who are sitting in with me, and we're providing a backdrop. And I was just like, with the oppressive systems being out there, is protest the answer? Is there a better way? But I wanted also to involve audience participation. So the idea was for you, the sitter, to come into the space, sit on the mat, and we are behind you. And, you know, since hashtags were the thing, they still are the thing. Many, and we call it hashtag activism.
Yeah.
You can align yourself with a groupthink mentality very easily by just throwing up a hashtag. Is that helping? Is that effective? You know, I don't, you I wanted a platform people to be able to write down what if they were protesting something, what that is. And I got a really great response. I kept all these letters in a box, and they're very powerful, from young children being passionate about, you know, their things, to, you know, adults. And Anthony brought his class by. We have, you know, the great Robert Pruitt there, who now lives in New York.
Right. I think also the idea of sitting, feeling what those folks felt, you know, have the act of having to sit, you know, and be involved. I think it really opens your eyes to that struggle, and we're still having to do this. You know, is just I shout out to those in the civil rights movement, because the restraint that they had to have, you know, it's very powerful. This is such a fantastic interactive piece. So I know we all have mentors or art family in my head, and I like to call David Hammons my Uncle David, and Betty Saw my mama, because I believe I'm the lost Saw daughter. But David Hammons is amazing. He just comes up with stuff, does stuff, and then he just kind of disappears. But he came up with this body printmaking, a form of printmaking, literally using his body. And we were able to see this piece, this summer, at the Soul of a Nation exhibition, which thank God we were still able to see at the Museum of Fine Arts. And admissions office, again, talks about, you know, the segregation in the education system and not being allowed to go to a particular school because of your skin. And this is in 1969, where you still had a lot of protests. And he literally, it's like his whole body is pressed, like, let me in, why can't I get in? And then on the right side, you can see the physical act of him printing. So George Stinney, was the youngest American to date to be executed. He was executed by electric chair for a crime that he probably did not commit. It was almost physically impossible for him to commit the crime that he was accused of. So Deborah Roberts, shout out to Deborah Roberts, who has the show I'm currently up right now in Austin. She is from Austin. Did this incredible rendition, excuse me, of George Stinney. It's called 80 Days. And Deborah Roberts, generally, her work is primarily young Black girls, but she felt that I didn't want to do it, but I was called to do it. And the piece on the left is actually in with the National Portrait Gallery. It was a finalist in the National Portrait Gallery's exhibition series. So a piece that, since Rabéa and I have been doing this presentation, that we show no matter what the topic is this piece by David Hammons called In the Hood. And he did this in 1993. And of course, when we show it to students, the first thing they say is Trayvon Martin, Trayvon Martin. And it's not to minimize Trayvon's death at all. I don't even know if Trayvon was born in 1993, but David Hammons used the metaphor of the hood. And you're looking at it different ways. One, what relates this hood to fear? You know, you hear the term, oh, he's a hood. Or could it recognize neighborhoods and gentrification? And of course, we in this century, well, the 2000s, think of Trayvon, who was hunted. Trayvon had on a hood in the rain. But just the idea of this emptiness and this empty hood, I just think it's such a striking sculpture by such a simple object. So our sister, Delita Martin, young son, Caleb, only wears hoodies. Caleb is 17 now, 16 or 17. And since he was a little boy, he's always worn hoodies. And the leader will say that, teachers will call and say, could you please ask him not to wear hoodies? Why can't this young boy wear what he wants to wear? Because there's such a fear, say it again.
A stigma.
Yeah, a stigma attached with wearing a hoodie. And so again, during the summer, she and I would just talk through the night and everything that's going on. Caleb is her only child. And the leader, I like to call her that little one in our group, that little mean one. But she doesn't shake. She's a fearless little something, but she was shook over Ahmaud Arbery because her son Caleb jogs every day. And they live in a predominantly rural white area in Huffman, Texas. And he jogs every day. And he didn't understand the fear that she had. So they talked about it. And they said, well, let's do this piece. And they carved on it together. That is Caleb. And she said, well, Caleb, what do you want it to say? And he said, let me breathe. Because even in his community, he still understood what happened to George Floyd. So from this poster, she was able to create an artist activism grant fund with the Black Box Press Foundation. And it allows artists an opportunity to receive a grant and continue their work as it relates to art activism.
Yeah, it's a great example of turning a negative into a positive. And yes, her personal activism was raising money so that someone else can voice or do their practice. Especially now during COVID, we're not working or we're, just because we're at home more doesn't mean that we're creating more. We've got all these emotional things to contend with. Right.
Yeah. So Elizabeth Catlett on the left side created this monumental sculpture called Target, 1970. Things have not changed. As James Baldwin, and I'll paraphrase, I won't read the whole thing, but to be conscious in America, in this country, to be a Negro and to be conscious is to be in a rage all of the time. And so you think of on the left side, just that Target. Think about what happened, in the spring. The nerdiest type of brother that you could think of, a bird watcher, a Black bird watcher in Central Park. And a woman is suddenly threatened and she puts on this whole performance for the police. He could have been killed. He could have been killed by the way she called the police. So we did a show at Texas A&M called She Matters. And this is one of the pieces that I had done. And it was inspired by Elizabeth Catlett's Target. And it is an animated image of crosshairs and just women being, it's like, we feel like we're being targeted. Can't go to the grocery store, can't sell water. We're running into Karens and everybody else. So my piece was called Just Let Me Breathe.
Yeah, we wanted to, bring further attention to the idea of a target. As we mentioned, Ann and I are big hip hop heads. And part of the reason for that for me is because it was a genre that growing up, super early 80s, I was getting histories that I wasn't getting in other places. So in the rap movement at the time when Public Enemy came out, Fear of a Black Planet as an album title, like what to me, someone in rural Louisiana at the time, what did that even mean? It spoke to, and especially with the design of the logo in particular, that was designed by Chuck D. Yeah, he was speaking to the same thing you just mentioned, the fact that you felt, or that Black men in particular were targeted, not felt targeted, were targeted. But like when you wear a hoodie, like what young men now probably feel like, targeted or some kind of way just because they are wearing this. And what he has in the center of the crosshairs there is a figure of a man with a hat. And what many people understood, that was perhaps a state trooper. Here in Texas, our state troopers do wear hats, that maybe it was like the Public Enemy was the police. But when in actuality, this is at the time, rappers, the most popular being Run DMC, wore these hats, and that's a B-boy stand. So this is Black men being in the crosshairs. This is their logo.
Right.
as a group. You know, again, this is super early 80s where the visible racial tension in the United States was, you know, not any less than it is now.
Yeah, that's true. And it's still a very popular image on t-shirts and pins and everything else to this day, to this day. The GOAT, the greatest of all time, Emory Douglas, Minister of Culture for the Black Panthers. They produced a weekly newspaper. And what's so interesting about, he was so talented that a lot of these works that look like prints early on were actually marker drawings. And they could only afford one color ink. So he really had to think about design wise, how to create these pieces so that they could be, you know, produced and not, you know, lose the value in art terms. Emory Douglas is still alive today and he's still working. The image on the right side is of Oscar Grant, who in the early 2000s was killed at the BART station in San Francisco, handcuffed. As much as things change, some things stay the same. So Emory Douglas, if you're interested in looking up a true art activist early on who was able to make political statements, I would encourage you to check him out.
Yeah, we had the privilege of hearing him come to the station, same place where we just showed you Libby had hers. You know, he came and spoke. It just, as a graphic design genre, just amazing work to look at.
Absolutely. So in 2015, Rabéa and Delita and myself, we were at Tougaloo Art Colony in Tougaloo, Mississippi, one of the locations that spearheaded the civil rights movement. And I just will never forget this day. Our friend Frank Robinson was giving we had daily art presentations and Frank was on stage and Frank was doing his presentation and he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "Ann, what's going on at Prairie View?" And I had no idea what Frank was talking about. I go back and check my email. We're getting all these "don't talk to the press." I'm like, what is going on? And he was talking about Sandra Bland and the death of Sandra Bland. And I literally drive by, going to work every day. I drive by the place where she was stopped for not having her blinker on. And then 2 days later, she's dead in the Waller County jail. And to this day, I've not gotten out the car. I still can't do it. So in 2015, my works began to shift a little bit. And one of the things I did was this glasses series, and it's called It Just Keeps Happening, 2015, from Lando Castile, Michael Brown. It was just like every week. And again, it's not like these killings have not happened before. We're seeing it now. We're seeing it on tape. And so on the left side, it's actually a neo soul singer, Michelle Thibault, but it's a grieving mother grieving the loss of her son on the right in the mirror of police glasses, aviator glasses that are commonly worn by police. And I've shown this several times in some exhibitions. It's in a box and you can read "It Just Keeps Happening" in the shadows. And again, you have this looming shadow of police glasses. David Hammonds again did this tribute to Michael Stewart, who was murdered in New York City, jumping the train styles. I mean, how many people did not do that? But when he was arrested, he was beaten and he died in the hospital and his eyes were bulging out because he was choked. When the coroner, he literally pulled out his eyeballs and put them in bleach so it would not reveal that the police had choked him to death. So of course there were no consequences. So David Hammonds did this piece called "The Man That Nobody Killed." And it feels like, to me, the same thing that happened to Breonna Taylor. How do you charge the police for shooting into a neighbor's house, but no one is charged for gunning her down in her own home? And that was the inspiration for this piece. And this piece as well. I know we're running on time, so I won't play all of this. But again, during the nights, I would make these little videos. And this is one of the rare pieces, because my work is generally conceptual, that I actually use Breonna's face. And Jill Scott has this beautiful song where she sings a riff that says, "You broke me, but I'm healing." And I feel like that has to be Breonna's mother. You broke me, but I'm healing. So in this song, Jill Scott she just rips, "You broke me, but I'm healing." And you can just kind of feel it.
You know, for a long time, we didn't have images of women.
Yes.
And like you mentioned a few moments ago, how you felt your work shift after the Tougaloo. I saw that shift, and I saw it in myself as well, where, you know, the need to kind of address what's going on became
Yeah.
a very important way to document, because we noticed at the time that although we would hear the stories, they would go away just as fast as we heard about them. And the media coverage that would be about the lost lives of Black women at the hands of police wasn't near as much as Black men that we were losing at the hands of police. You know, we knew their names, but Sandra Bland was sort of like the one that, you know, that stuck with us because of logistically where it happened. It was so close to home. And then now I think with Breonna Taylor is the first time, at least for me, that I'm seeing the image
on a national,
globally.
Yeah, globally.
Yeah.
You know, Oprah putting her image on the cover of her magazine, where only Oprah has been on the cover of her magazine. Billboards, Ava DuVernay is doing projects. And I really had to come to terms with doing something for Breonna, because it just hurt me so bad. You know, she's in her own home, her boyfriend defending her. I mean, it's just so much. And what was interesting about this video, because I don't claim to be a filmmaker at all, is that you can see the shadows and it's unstable. It's kind of like a body cam, you know. And I've been doing these candle series probably since 2016, and it's just how many more candles must be lit is what the series is called. And it relates to just having these vigils. And on the right side, I had my students compare the stories of George Stinney and George Floyd. And there were some very interesting parallels when it comes to criminalizing the victim.
Yes, and you know, when we hear the same stories over and over and over again, the danger is that we become desensitized to the importance of them. And with your exhibit, how do I say her name, that you did a couple of years, and in response to the Sandra Bland case in particular at the time, not to mention the several others, but I think this was like where that shift happened. One of the things, and this is at Art League Houston, so we want to give them a shout out for even having the courage to exhibit something. This is 2017. It's not like now, you know, people,
they're begging for it.
Yeah. 2017, it was still like somewhat controversial, like, oh, you know. And what I liked about this is that you opened the door to not just what was happening here in the States, but with the women that you invited to exhibit. This piece is by Monica Villarreal, Chicano artist, who wanted to speak on Indigenous women that were kidnapped and murdered without any recognition. Not important enough. Important enough.
For years and to this day.
Yeah, just, you know, and women have been doing work about this, like collecting shoes that have been found in random places, anything to symbolize the life of these women, since we don't have photographs. I did a Target piece that was sort of like a remix of the Public Enemy logo, but this time having a woman in the center. And you see it's kind of skewed because it was an anamorphic wall drawing where you had to kind of move around. Like you were avoiding the crosshairs until the image came together for you, and only one person could see it at a time. You have Rosine Kwame, who is a Cameroonian artist at the time, and this I'm pointing, I should describe the yellow fabric that you see, which is embroidered, hand embroidered. She was in Cuba at the time. We have Lovey Olivia on the left, who is bringing visibility to the transgender community that, you know, up until recently also has been, and not even recently, but giving a little bit more visibility. and Kaneem, who is
Kadeem Smith, yes,
has
it's
the sculptural
conceptual but
pieces that are
powerful. And I think one of the strongest pieces was, well, they were all strong. But what Autumn did really stopped me in my track. Kaneem and I were installing that day. And so Jenny put up the TV and, we got the little, disc in or whatever. And it's just words. But it was called See You When I Get There. And it was literally like what Sandra Bland was saying to her mother, I'm going to Prairie View. I'm going to have this interview. I'll call you when I get home. And she never was able to make that call. And it was just so powerful. And
and
yeah,
the
it just
piece
stopped me in my
you're
tracks.
talking about is the blue illuminated piece to
Yeah.
the left of the yellow, which is a flat
Yes.
screen video installation.
Yeah, it was powerful.
And yes, I mentioned that I love a neon sign. Just in brief, this was Sandra Bland's case number. And, when I was given, or when I found the transcript, which is in the public domain, and reading it, I couldn't get past the first 1 or 2 pages. And I was like, yeah, I don't need to rehash this. We know how it ends. But what struck me as interesting was that she was just assigned a case number for the day. And obviously in different counties, you have different codes. So, if you know what you're looking at, you can break down where the crime happened and whatnot. But to someone like me, it's just another number. You have, the F probably stands for female, who knows, but your gender is wiped, your race, your religion, your age, everything about you is stripped from you, and you're put into
the system.
And we can't even speak to the millions of people that are just lost in systems like this on a global scale, but hopefully keeping the light on, which is why I wanted to use a light and a neon sign, was to keep that forever in our memories.
Yes, yeah. So again, simplicity, conceptual, powerful. The piece that I did, was actually a glass quilt, and it had a video, and it was the drive to Prairie View, the drive that she would have taken. And again, you talk about the police report was 26 pages for a traffic stop, 26 pages. So I embossed as much as I could on this glass quilt, and you can read on the right side, you can see some of it in detail. And then I had the red and blue lights to represent the cops. And then, it also had a quilting pattern. So there was so much symbolism involved in this piece, but I wanted people to see, Prairie View is a beautiful country drive, and it's called The Narrative. And then on the inside, I had printed images of her hands, the movements of her hands. And then I'm going to end this with some of the work that students are doing. I won't play all of it, but these students, they're woke now. They were very involved this summer. On the left side is a piece by David Hammons called Injustice Case, another body print, when Bobby Seale was being tried for a crime he was accused of but didn't commit. So I have the students, they have to recreate a work of art. And this student, she did it as a video, and she recreated how she felt about this piece, looking at it and then knowing about the case. So it was very powerful that she went there. This girl is a biology major, not even an art major, but this was summer of 2020, and this is how the kids were feeling. Another piece, and this still tugs at my heart to this day, having to teach online, we've had to make adjustments. So I had to come up with an affordable way to teach printmaking for my students, and one of them was transfer printing. But this particular student is a poet, and so she just, I think this was an outlet for her, this particular piece. And she wrote on this piece, her prints are on the petals of the flowers and their skeletons, but she wrote a poem, and it's called 4 Nights Ago. And 4 nights ago, she kept talking about, I dreamt I was shot. 4 nights ago, I dreamt I was shot. And I heard a sound and my mother wailed. And I just think that's just so powerful to how students are actually feeling. They feel like, we don't let that youngness fool you, but they're scared. And I just think that's such a powerful piece. That's a detail. This is the same student, just to recognize what the heck is going on at Army bases at Fort Hood. What is going on? You know, we lost, Vanessa Guillen on the right side, Lavinia Johnson on the left side. Not enough people know about her case. What's going on with these military women that they just keep coming up dead? And I thought she did a beautiful job as a cast and a transfer print on plaster. It was just beautifully done.
I want to give you kudos on all of these projects, and because teaching a studio class virtually,
yes,
I was never a big fan of, and now because I have you and you showing me how it can be very successful, I need to rethink my approach to that. Just a testament to your skill as an instructor, but also like the need for your students to voice. These look like professional works.
Yeah. The whole class wasn't as good, but you know, those who took it seriously, and one thing I never do as a professor is, you can't throw nothing away. I can't help you grow if you're trashing everything. So these were mistakes. We had a terrible time trying to be like Lovey and do these plaster prints, but she saved all the pieces and she was able to create a file. And what she focused on was the criminalization of these victims. And she learned I taught them how to photograph their works, and it's just a beautiful installation. And we're going to end it here.
Yeah, I really had to convince Anne to show this piece because I know you don't like using appropriated imagery. You like to work from your own photographs. Mm-hmm. But I think in doing this one of D Nice, and hopefully the audience knows, if not, you know, he's a DJ, more known as just a popular DJ now, but for us, he was a part of Boogie Down Productions, KRS-One's DJ back in the day, produced Self-Destruction, which was very much activism in our time. But it was something that happened this summer during COVID, and it was just, you know, he really was one of the first that decided, you know what, there's nothing else to do, but I'm going to do what my art is. Right. And I'm going to go live on Instagram and I'm going to DJ. And I was in the audience that week when he first started, because, you know, I've been following him. He's actually a great photographer.
He's a fantastic photographer.
Yeah, and so I was following him first because of, like, you know, I got to follow all my old hip hop heads, my heroes, but he's also an amazing photographer. Mm-hmm. And so I was alerted to, you know, his Instagram live, and I was like, wow, he's DJing live, and this is fun. Within like 4 days, it had jumped, and I have a screenshot of it jumping to 100,000.
Oh my God!
You got Michelle Obama in the audience.
Michelle Obama was in there. I heard about it. I was watching MSNBC, and Joy Reid was talking about it. She was like, "Oh, Oprah was in there, Michelle Obama was in there." And I'm like, "Well, how did I miss that?"
It was such
the next night, and I've been hooked ever since.
It was such a moment of joy when we needed joy.
Yes, we were freaking and be crazy and let loose.
I was stuck in Louisiana. I couldn't come home. I was trying to teach school from an iPad, getting Wi-Fi from a cell phone. I had no Wi-Fi. It was crazy, and it was a moment of beauty and just togetherness and community through art. And it was music, but still art, and it just brought us together. And we have Club Quarantine is a thing. He's profiting off of it now monetarily.
Good for him.
Even a truck commercial. Exactly.
Played the Super Bowl. Yeah, good for him.
So you know, and this is just a beautiful image of a beautiful human.
It is actually one of the better leaves I've ever printed.
Yeah, it was flawless.
The leaf cracked in the right place. I have it in a shadow box, and I still have hopes that I'll get it to him. I just want I don't want him to buy it. I just want him to have it.
We're gonna get it to him. Yeah. We're gonna get it to him. Yeah. Hashtag DNI. Speaking of which, this is how you can find us on the gram.
That's how you can find us. We thank you. We probably went a little longer than we would if we were live, but it's all good. I want to again acknowledge Prairie View at the bottom, Black History Month, and PrintAustin. I'm a founding member of Print Matters, so I am a proud mama. You guys adjusted beautifully for PrintAustin. I know it has been a struggle to do it online. The PrintEXPO exhibition series, everything was great. So we thank you so much. I mistakenly introduced Rabéa without her introducing herself in the beginning. But again, I am Ann Johnson, Professor of Art Practice at Prairie View A&M University.
I'm Professor Ballin. I know it looks like Ballin. I'm not Ballin.
You ballin'.
I'm trying to get there, but yeah, I teach art history, art appreciation, drawing at Lone Star College North Harris. Some of my students have ended up in Professor Johnson's classroom.
Right.
So I'm glad to be somewhat of a bridge. And I'm privileged to be here, PrintAustin as well. I love being able to participate biennially. So happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody.